the internet's changed things for obviously a while, but there's still kind of these old models of like the Mad Men era that still persists, where agencies are still kind of working as if they're going to win an account and that account's going to be with them for decades or something, and so on and so forth. So more and more, the problem we're solving is helping agencies jump into the cold water of selling to people who are problem aware but not yet necessarily solution aware.
On today's episode of Rise, Grind, Repeat, we talked to Dan from Sales Schema. His company helps marketing agencies crush their outbound efforts, and we talk about quality over quantity. Let's dive right in. Dan, thank you so much for joining on an episode of Rise, Grind, Repeat. I'm excited about this because just after researching your company, it's you do a lot of marketing stuff to help marketing agencies, it seems like, and I'm always fascinated by that because it's kind of like the old shoe cobbler where the shoe cobbler's kids don't have their shoes, and a lot of marketing agencies struggle with their own marketing. And I mean, before we kind of get into there, I'd love to just hear more about kind of your backstory. How did you get into marketing, and basically how'd you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Really appreciate it. So my background was kind of first as I moved to New York in like 2010 and waited tables and stuff, and then got some internships and basically landed in an ad agency because that's kind of where you just end up in New York when you find yourself falling into a job. It tends to be in the agency world. And at that time, I was kind of like an accounts grunt. I did social media campaigns for like setting up strategies but mostly it was like monitoring, like the Facebook wall for Monster Cable when headphones would break, and worked on like them and Mark Echo and some others. So kind of dealt with like the agency grind for a while, and then sort of meandered into a sales role at an animation studio. Just randomly, I found a job on Craigslist, and I was doing kind of sales and account management at this small shop called Idea Rocket. And that's really where I learned a lot because we invested a lot in marketing, got on thousands of calls over the course of a few years, definitely stumbled a lot, but got decent at selling a creative service, which I think is different than selling lots of other things because it's just intangible. It's not of any specific value necessarily. It's all just kind of in the ether. So learned a lot from that, kind of like took the Tim Ferriss pill and like traveled Asia and did that whole thing and started Sales Schema. And then in the early days, I didn't know what I was doing and figured, okay, lead generation is the closest thing to sales, which is kind of what I know, but lead generation might actually be able to scale as opposed to like a sales coaching business, which I didn't feel like I wanted to do at the time. So I think through like some amount of luck, I happened to find a market and a need that I actually knew, which was there happened to be a need in the market that I had some attachment to, which was the agency world. And I'll give you the floor because we can go really far into the reasons for this business and problems that we solve and stuff. But there's definitely, a need for sales help. Like you said, there's definitely cobbler's children issues in the agency world. So I think we got lucky there. Yeah.
Yep. No, very similar path. I mean, started in the agency world, 8 years ago or so. And just kind of, that's how I started this EIC agency and just saw the opportunity, not to so much things were bad, but I think there's a way to approach it a little bit differently. But I'd love to hear what are some of the things, it sounds like that's kind of how you built Sales Schema is identifying that opportunity and just bring a solution to it. So, what problem do you solve? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
Go through.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what's cool about our business is that I really get, we get to help agencies solve a pretty big problem. And at the same time, work with agencies that in a lot of other ways are way further ahead than us. And, in the fact that we're working with agencies a lot of the time that have been around for decades at a time. They have amazing portfolio clients. They have every crazy war story under the sun from working with like whatever, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Google. But there reaches this point in the agency where referrals and personal networks and the stuff that it took to build the agency just aren't enough anymore. And I think it's a macro problem because there's sort of like, it's one of these things where the future's here, but it's just not evenly distributed yet, where the internet's changed things for obviously a while, but there's still kind of these old models of like the Madman era that still persists, where agencies are still kind of working as if they're going to win an account and that account's going to be with them for decades or something, and so on and so forth. So more and more, the problem we're solving is helping agencies jump into the cold water of selling to people who are problem aware but not yet necessarily solution aware. So what's really worked for us is instead of trying to say, like all these other like lead generation companies are doing, trying to say like, we have a fancy machine, we're going to put it in a token and out comes the business. We've been saying, well, the truth, which is that we're going to make the process of swimming in this cold water better, faster, cheaper than if you go it alone. And that's really what it's about. It's anybody that's trying to say that generating meetings and closing deals with large organizations is easy is lying. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of consistency, and our goal is just to make it easier.
And so how do you kind of provide that consistency? Because I agree, it's everyone's always looking for like a magic potion. What do you do just to close it? But it takes a lot from introducing who you are as a brand, what problems you solve, reaching the right decision maker. Can you kind of elaborate without giving away the magic potion?
Oh yeah, no, I give away everything. It's like that Derek Sivers quote: "If it was just about information, we'd all be millionaires with great abs."
Yep.
So I don't care. Anybody that wants to do what we can do themselves is welcome to. But I think that it's a good question, and there's a lot that goes into it. So tangibly, what we're doing, and there's a lot of things that work. So it's not to say that like what we're doing is the only thing you can do that works, but our core competency is around outreach, is around knocking on doors in a tasteful way to get meetings, and we're doing that on our clients' behalf. So we're not like middlemen. So we're using LinkedIn, we're using email, we're using phone. We've used other channels in the past. We could, we have ideas to use direct mail at some point, although I don't want to go off on a tangent, but COVID's kind of making that harder. So that's what we're doing. But I think that's all tactical. The thing that really makes sense for us, or the thing that we prioritize more nowadays that we didn't as much in the early days, is partnering with the right agencies to begin with, and making sure that we're selective about working with agencies at the time when we're ready to help. And with that in mind, the foundation of everything is a strong value prop. And like, what the hell does that mean? That can mean anything. And there's not one answer, but more and more, what it looks like is specialization. And I think that's the thing that causes a lot of anxiety and hand wringing among the prospects and clients we work with, is the idea of saying, this is where our agency does business. This is our focus.
Yep.
And we're not going to mess with stuff that's outside of that. And whenever we have clients that are well specialized, just that's like the main consistency in terms of what separates successful campaigns from ones that take longer to pick up, is specialization around a particular area, around a particular market, or solving a particular problem. So that's all old news. That's kind of like a tenet of all forms of marketing. Yeah.
So do you actually help agencies identify what that is, or do they kind of already have that and you help them take that and then do the outreach? Because outside of agencies, with businesses, you ask them what values you bring, what problems you solve, and it's just like, that's a good question, and
yeah,
I think so many businesses don't have it 100% nailed down with confidence, and I think that's a huge differentiator is when you have that. So is that something that you help with, or?
To an extent, yeah, it's a good question. So there's kind of three categories. There's the negative category, which are people that were like, we just don't think you have it together yet. You should go talk to this branding agency consultant, agency coach, and that we trust, and they might be able to help you. That's one category. The second category is they really have it together, and then it's just fuel on the fire situation. They have a million case studies in a particular area. And then the third category, which is the most common for us, is more like they have it, but there's just some onion layers there that we have to peel back to find it. And then, we're obviously not like web people. We're not like rebuilding their site or reinventing it or anything like that. But what I do think is that doing outreach campaigns is kind of an effective exercise in figuring out the exact, message to market match, and actually figuring out what works by contacting people as opposed to just speculating all day in a Google Doc or something. So that's kind of how we think about it.
Yep. No, it's a fun process to go through. We just recently got someone to help with some outreach a month or two ago. And it was going through that whole process. What value do you have? What verticals do you want to go after? We're only, just hit 2 years old. And so it's still learning and we'll continue to learn. I'm sure even when we think we have it nailed down, it'll continue to evolve. But I mean, so outside of that, it's you help with the lead generation, which I mean, aside from agencies, there's that could help tons of businesses. So I mean, why did you stick with agencies? Because that's what you know and want to run with?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, and I wish I could say that I was like a Professor X, like master of markets, and I was like, this is where the opportunity is. But really, it was the market that I was coming from. It was the area that I knew. So in the early days, this is a non sequitur, but I always think that Vince Gilligan and like Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad are like a really good model for entrepreneurship because they just not in terms of the actual content, like obviously we're not cooking meth, but in terms of like the process and what it feels like. Like there's the first season of Better Call Saul where he's just like working with different clients, and then he kind of finds his niche, and there's people that are attracted to what he's doing for whatever reason. And I kind of felt like that, like for whatever reason, the people that were attracted to the royal we in the earliest days were agencies. And I think if I'm being honest with myself, we got lucky because it's a niche that needs help with the top of funnel more than others, so that's kind of the answer there. Yeah. And then, I think that beyond that, there are things that make specializing on the agency world important and make us, I think more effective than lots of other companies. And one of them is the fact that just marketing leaders are sold to more than anybody else in the C-suite. They're just, if you look at like the landscape of not just agencies, but ad tech, people selling to CMOs and marketing leaders, et cetera, it's incredible. So, and also it's kind of like you can't BS a BSer or whatever. It's like they're also, they understand marketing, they understand how this stuff works. They have their pick of the litter with agencies, because there's so many agencies, although perhaps fewer now. So, it takes kind of knowing that touch and knowing how to do it the right way. In some ways, it's like every other situation. In some ways, it's different, I'd say.
Yep. No, I love the top of the funnel, and it seems like from what you kind of offer in your services, that's really what you help with. And I mean, we're just huge on, so we do podcasts and a lot of video. And I mean, it's just a lot of people come out with just buy from me, we're an agency, or we're this brand, buy, but don't really give any value. And I mean, what you touched on, I give it all away for free. I just love that model. But as we go like kind of into the three different things that you offer, I mean, it's the automated outreach, the thought leadership, and then the outbound lead generation. We'd love to hear just a little bit more about each one and how you use those three pillars, I guess, to generate not only just leads, but quality leads.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess the one thing I'd say a little just slightly differently is we're not super big on selling the idea of it being automated, because I think that not that there's anything wrong with automation in some places, and it's not to say that we don't use that we're not using automation at all. I think automation has its place, but I think the important thing, the expectation we like to set with our clients is that everything we invent, everything we come up with is going to have to be revamped frequently. If something's working well, there's this. Can I curse on the show?
Go for it.
But there's this great article called the Law of Shitty Click-Through Rates, and it's I forgot the gentleman's name, but I think he was writing for one of the big VC blogs. I apologize, but it's a classic article. It's from like 10 years ago, but it's the idea that like if you're getting a good return, it's going to be for a limited time.
Mm-hmm.
Like things either because of competitors or because the platforms change or because other people are doing it. So, it's the risk of sounding cliche. Like what we're doing for clients is a marathon, not a sprint. So to answer your question, that's usually what we're starting with is like targeted outreach and appointment setting, and basically getting our clients used to the rhythm of selling to people outside their personal network. More recently, we basically just had a huge, amazing result internally from doing exactly what we're doing right now, like getting on podcasts, getting the message out to the right audience. And then we sort of realized that, hey, this is outreach centric as well. This kind of fits with our core competency. And it's sort of like a marketing play for our clients too. So and the reason I think it's so cool is that, there's so much that you can do on the content marketing front. Like you can write articles, you can write white papers. Before our current situation, you could do trade shows, you could do all this stuff. But there's something to be said for plugging into somebody else's audience and doing what we're doing,
Yeah.
right? And what's cool about it is you're not leaving your office, you're done with it in an hour. And also like so many of our clients and probably agencies like yourselves actually know their shit. Like they have cool stuff to talk about. Um, and meanwhile, like nothing against consultants and authors and coaches, but there's that whole space has been flooded with coaches and not enough with actual agencies that are doing cool work every
Mhm.
day. So anyway, we just sort of saw it as a great opportunity for our clients. So we've been doing a lot of that, kind of getting people on shows and digital publication placements, and then also more recently we've been moving into training and support. And I just think that the main reason behind that is there's just lots of agencies that can't take us on yet for whatever reason, and in the past we haven't had anything to give them, and
Yep.
it's the next best thing is if you have more time than money, then we'll just give you our IP basically, and you go run with it.
Nice. Yeah. So I mean, I love the thought leadership. I think there's a lack of it whenever it comes to really differentiating who you are, just as a CEO or C-suite level person, but even just as a business. And I mean, that's a huge reason why we did this. Is it's like I just felt myself like in an hour meeting explaining who we are, my background, what we can do. It's just like there's not enough time, and
Yeah.
to really just articulate how we can really help. And so and I'm huge on just the relationship building. I mean, people buy from people they trust, and by producing stuff like this, people can look at your history, and it's like they can tell, where you're coming from. And so, I guess where I'm going with this is when it comes to thought leadership, what are the different ways that people can get their thought leadership out there? I mean, we're doing the podcast. You mentioned blogs, but I mean, are there any other ways that you're helping or seeing just thought leadership being executed well and distributed out to the world?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's like really contextual. I think that like if you're selling to restaurants, then that's going to change the channels you might choose to use compared to if you were selling to enterprise beverage companies or something. So it's hard to say, and I think that the starting point is figuring out who you're talking to, and then that makes everything else a lot easier, as opposed to saying this is the trendy place to be or that's the trendy place to be. Um, that said, I think that podcasts do have a lot going for it, especially in B2B, because you're doing multiple things. You're building a new relationship with somebody else. You you're creating content. Chances are you're having conversations like this anyway. So, and also like with the quote unquote new normal, um, it's sort of like lends itself to what would become a podcast to begin with, whether it's video or audio
Yeah.
or both. So we're really bullish on podcasts. But that said, like if you're in a world where people are consuming white papers more and maybe it's older school and you don't want to do a podcast,
Yeah.
then you don't have to. Like none of this stuff is mandatory. I think the main thing is not overextending yourself. I think like one sacred cow that I've heard is that I like to attack is like the idea of having to be everywhere. I think that what's underestimated is the amount of time it takes to really do well with a particular channel. And I've been guilty of this within my company where it's like, well, we're creating video content. Let's just throw it up on YouTube. It's like, no, like you can't just throw it up on YouTube. You're going to have to create stuff that's built for YouTube that fits with the algorithm. You have to interact with comments, which are often nasty. You have, you have to drive people from YouTube to something like that. That's just one example, but every channel has its own amount of work, so that's why you want to be selective and also stick with something for a long enough amount of time. So I almost equate it with like learning a language or picking up a new sport. You want to pick up like 5 languages at once. So
Yeah.
so anyway, maybe that's like a coy answer, but
Yeah.
that's kind of what we've seen work.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I love it because it all comes down to really whose audience you want to reach and what's your end result that you really want to get. And then from there, it's who's making that decision. How do they consume content? To your point, it could be a 24-year-old female or it could be a 64-year-old male. And I mean, how they consume content, what gets their attention. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get is just someone's attention so that we can communicate who we are and how we can help them out. And so it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that, um, not to be like rose colored glasses, but I think some silver linings of us all being remote now is that everybody is an outsider. Like before there was this perception of like insider and outsider. So especially with agencies, and we've gotten this objection, everyone's selling B2B services. One objection that comes up across the board is like, why should I trust you to do this better than we can in-house? You're like the other. Except for the stuff that's like obviously you would outsource, like whatever janitorial services in your office or something. But now that's all over because like everyone's everyone's in a different place. So it's like what's the,
Yeah.
there's not a huge difference anymore. So I think that's a huge opportunity for agencies that specialize.
Yep. And kind of shifting gears to, I mean, your business. I mean, like I said, we're 2 years old. There's a lot that I've been learning in the last 2 years, and a lot of hurdles to jump over. But I mean, as you've been building your company, I mean, what's one of the biggest hurdles that you've kind of faced, and how'd you kind of solve for it, and how did that make you run the business a bit better?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's obviously not just one, but I think if I had to like make an overarching category, I think it's just we're in a people business, and people are hard. It's hard to deal with people. Where we're complex, we all have idiosyncrasies, and and it's just people all the way down. So employees, freelancers, clients, myself. So I think that's been the biggest hurdle is figuring out how to manage every sort of people issue, and that usually comes with expectation setting, the managing of information. What information do people need to have access to when, whether it's clients, employees, et cetera. So I think that covers a whole lot of different hurdles at different times, but it's basically what it is. We're not in the software business, and as much as agencies want to be software companies, it takes, there's exceptions, but we're essentially, they're 80%, 90% in the people business. So I think that's what it is.
Yep. No, it's funny because we're literally going through that right now. It's like, I mean, kind of been running and gunning for a while, but now it's like creating departments. At what time does this department come in when it comes to the client relations? And it's all people stuff. And it's not, I mean, that's what is hard to scale in agencies. It takes more people, and that's a lot of moving parts. I mean, a client can go away, and all of a sudden you don't have the finances to keep a couple people on, and then all of a sudden you hire a big client. Now you need to bring people on, and it's keeping everyone in tune, and it's just so up and down, and it's craziness. I mean, do you kind of have to deal with that as well?
Of course, yeah, and that's always tough. But I think that it's easy to kind of get a grass is always greener approach where, and I tend to get this personally with friends that have like e-commerce businesses or software businesses, but then like I've spent enough time with them now on like whatever business retreats or just hanging out, et cetera. And there is a dark side to that too. Like there really is a no free lunch sort of thing where I think the rough side of software, and the reason it's, and I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent, is like the reason that it's a black belt sport is that they have to create a product and launch it and then sort of like hope people want it, versus what we do. We get to innovate all the time, and we get to figure out if something works very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And also our margins are better in the beginning. Like when a service business, generally speaking, you're making money from the jump, if you do it the right way, et cetera. So there's that. And then e-commerce is a whole other thing. So I think that's one thing that I'm trying to kind of edge into is like, okay, maybe there are some productized, not services, but courses and things that we can kind of dance with that, but without getting, too grass is always greener.
Yeah.
Without moving too far to that direction.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on productizing services in
it's funny you should ask, because I was literally just reading a post in this business group I'm in called Dynamite Circle, and the big trend that I'm seeing right now is that everybody I know with a productized service is all reeling that back. They're all moving away from productized. And I feel honestly, like if I'm being honest, like a little vindicated by it, because part of it's like I've never been a good enough kind of systems thinking organized person to productize things. We've always been like not as clean in that respect. But the other thing that I've always thought about that's been validated is whenever people want to make a productized service, it's never because that's what the client wants, it's because that's what they want. They want to have this clean business that operates like a machine. And like I think there's nothing wrong with systems and processes, but the whole idea of like we're going to make this rigid structure, it doesn't really like match with being useful in a market. It's sort of more like it always seems to be kind of directed by the person running the company, the person selling something. So that's not to say that you can't organize lots of systems and lots of processes and be better on that. But ultimately, like, I think that this is bigger than just the productized service thing. Is like a lot of times with agencies, especially, there's kind of this like there's like a certain amount of self-centeredness where it's more about what, like, we want to do cool work, we want to do stuff that excites us, we want to do the fun projects, as opposed to thinking like, where can we actually be useful in a market? And then, chances are once you're being really useful, you'll be very successful. Once you're being very successful, then you're going to have a lot of fun. So that's my thinking on it too. But
no, it's tough because it's like if you don't have anything productized, it's like you're coming up with custom proposals and kind of reinventing the wheel every time. But if you're too productized, you're kind of boxing yourself and clients into something. And that's literally what we're trying to figure out now is how can we productize enough to where we're not spending hours and doing all this custom stuff, but not to where we're pigeonholing ourselves, our clients on the creative side and all that. And it's tough, but I mean, trying to find some type of balance to where it's just not having to go through the whole, not so much discovery, but just the again, just recreating the wheel on customized proposals. I mean, how do you, I guess, kind of approach it? If you aren't productizing a whole lot and you're a service-based business, I mean, do you just listen to where the needs are and kind of come up with something custom based off where you can fill in with value, or how do you guys kind of approach it?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's about solving a particular problem, right? So, for us, the problem that we're solving is not enough meetings at the top of the funnel. It's pretty simple. So that problem can be solved a variety of different ways. You could do literally everything under the sun. You could do webinars and paid ads and phone and email and LinkedIn, but you don't necessarily have to do all those things. Like one or two of those channels can be, very effective as well, like instead of doing everything else. So I think it's more starting with that question as opposed to saying, hey, and the example I just read about, I won't talk about the name of the company, but it was in the bookkeeping space. So they were, they're a productized bookkeeping service that's now considering moving away from that. And I think the reason they're moving away is the problem that their clients have is not bookkeeping, it's an overall accounting solution. And you need bookkeeping to have accounting, you need accounting to have controllership and planning, and so on. So I think the answer for us anyway, in my experience, is you have constraints. You have, whether it's the channels you're working on or a process or whatever, but you don't have just as long as you're solving the problem, basically. So that's kind of how I thought about it. And then beyond that, if you are going to focus on one vertical, I don't think that's the only way to specialize. I think you could probably specialize by focusing on a few similar verticals or doing some service that's like absolutely dynamic. But I'm skeptical of that, because if it's so cool, you're going to get competition with that service. Like influencer marketing is the example. Like influencer was hot for like 6 months, and now you can't throw a rock without hitting an influencer agency. So like now you have to be like influencer for XYZ or whatever. So I think that if you are going to focus on one or a few similar verticals, then it might be about going broader to solve a particular problem, right? That's where that's what we're trying to do with more like, courses and all this other stuff we're doing. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
How are the courses coming along? So, we've been toying with that idea as well, where it's like, we're doing the podcast. So we got a couple other shows that are kind of going on, but it's a lot of just giving content out there. But obviously got to go through everything. We're debating, do we package everything up and basically make it to where it's some type of course or just an education that takes you from top to bottom. Again, just trying to figure out different ways to create new revenue lines or whatever it may be, but while also still helping out. So, how has that process come along? Because I know that this is a hot topic for a lot of service companies as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm definitely not the course expert. It's funny because before I started this business, like I guess in the early days when I was sort of just like meandering around, I made courses about what I had learned in account management and sales and put them on Udemy, and they're like still there, generating some amount of passive income. So this time around, I was really like, I want to do it again. It's been years. I want to circle back to courses. It's going to be fun. I'm going to put together this course based on everything I know, and it's going to be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody I talked to that really knows their stuff, in the course space was like, no, like you need to take baby steps. You need to figure out really what people are up against when they're doing this themselves. So I was like, all right, crap, this is going to be a lot more work. But that's what we did, and basically the way we did it is we did a paid training course over the course of 4 weeks. So we did like 4 Zoom sessions over 4 weeks, a Slack channel, got went pretty in depth with people in sort of a done with you capacity. So I create a module, get feedback on it, create the next module based on a rough structure that I had. And before we did any of that, we surveyed our audience first, figured out what people were up against. So I think we'll see if it works. Maybe that won't work. Maybe we'll like launch a course to crickets. I'm completely not ready, but that could happen.
Yeah.
But I feel more confident about it than if I hadn't done this. So I think the answer is baby steps. I think it's just sort of like wading into it and admitting that there's a lot of unknowns about what people are up against, in that capacity. So we'll see how it goes.
Yep. So are you actually doing more hands-on education along with like modules, self-guiding modules?
So it's a good question. Right now, we do have like a training program, but that's kind of ancillary to everything else. And the training is where like we meet up. One of our strategists meets with our clients once every couple weeks and goes over and basically like is there is like a handheld method where it's helping them get set up with everything. For what we're doing with the course, I'm making it self-contained, to give to let people run with, as opposed to kind of like a hybrid model. But I have heard of that hybrid model working. I think it can work.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I think that's where it's at. I mean, there's a lot of courses out there, that are probably really good where you can go through and self kind of guide. But I think there's also, it's tough to scale if you're hands-on with everyone. You can only help so many people out. But something we're helping someone with is kind of the hybrid model where it's like you have the course, it's a price, and then you can sign up for basically like a private Facebook group. But he comes on once a week and does more group training type of stuff, so you can kind of still get that IP and get that on education. It creates recurring revenue for him, and then he has a self-guided course. And I personally think that's where it's all at. It's kind of our first go around helping someone out in that space. But I love the insight, and it's fun to figure out the best model.
Yeah. And I think all these things are, to use like a fancy word, kind of like symbiotic. Like they all tie together. Mm-hmm. In as much as like there's going to be people that have more time than money, and then they actually do well with what you taught them or with other things they've learned, and then they now can afford your agency service, or whatever. So, or they're just, there's just different phases in the people within the companies that you're selling to, where they might be on a downswing for some amount of time and might be interested in just hustling and circling the wagons. And then the course makes more sense, and then they're ready to get it off their plates. So, I think that all of that plays together. I think the through line is just, not underestimating the importance of understanding a particular vertical, a particular market, whatever it might be.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. And kind of shifting gears here a little bit. I mean, you work with agencies who work with a lot of brands and businesses. And I mean, you're helping agencies get opportunities to speak to them. And so you kind of have a pulse on are people investing more or less into marketing based off of, your clients' results essentially. And so with COVID and everything that's happened, I mean, how has that impacted, I guess, the agencies that you're working with and in your business, and how have you seen people pivoting? And would love just kind of a pulse on what you're kind of seeing, whether it's things are up.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I wish I had like a concise answer, but it's kind of all over the place. So I guess the predictable stuff. So we've had clients in the event space and others that predictably got hit pretty hard, some of which have paused, some of which have continued and have sort of pivoted to digital events and that sort of thing. So there's that. So I think another thing that we've seen is from our standpoint, and I'm not sure about, if the deals closing have been more or less. I would guess they would have to be less overall compared to like a boom period.
Yep.
But in terms of meetings generated, if anything, we're getting more meetings now than normal, and I think it's because um, the brands are looking for guidance, they're looking for leadership, and they, like I said earlier, there's less of this sense of other than there used to be.
Yeah.
So they're more into saying, yeah, I'll talk to you now. So the good news is I think the agencies, whether they work with us or do it some other way, that are getting these relationships now are going to be the ones that thrive. And the agencies that sit on their hands are the ones that won't. So that's kind of what we're seeing. And the other through line is, or the other continuation of what I was talking about, is that the agencies that are specialized and are focusing on a particular area are doing well, and we actually have seen a number of deals closed in those spaces, because like one example recently has been in the sort of home services franchise space. One of our clients serves that area and is doing quite well, and so things go to proposal and so on. I think that part of that's because of trends. People are investing in the home more, but also they're just well positioned for that. So that's so it's a little bit all over the place, but that's kind of what we're seeing. The other thing, and again, a lot of this is just acceleration of trends that were already in motion. It's like fuel on the fire, or the treadmill just got turned up to 20. And one of those is the move towards personalization, towards niche. In terms of our tactics, like what we used to be able to do is kind of like a shotgun approach, and the shotgun's become a sniper rifle. Or if you don't want to go with the guns, it's gone from flashlight to laser pointer, basically, is the what we've used. Yeah, used less controversially. So that's kind of, so what that means is a lot of times when we're doing outreach, we're researching. We might be doing a campaign to 50 or 100 people a week, and doing research on each one, referencing that research in the email, and that's producing perhaps better returns in some cases than doing a broad approach. So that's another thing we're seeing.
No, I love it. You guys are basically less quantity, higher quality. You can have better conversations than just, it goes to what, we kind of speak to with marketing, rather than having one evergreen ad that speaks to anyone and everyone. It's how can we segment our audiences as much as possible, so we have more data, so we can come up with creative that speaks more to who that person is. And
right,
you see in the conversion rates, you see, just the economics of it just makes sense.
Right. And I think it's because the bar's gotten higher for our attention. Like there's just more competition for attention, so you have to work harder to get it. And working harder means going after fewer people with more firepower, or more conscientiousness. So
yeah,
that's kind of what we've seen work. Yeah,
and it's been interesting. Going through all this, it's like right when COVID outbreak happened, it's like tons of panic. People pulled back on marketing. But one thing that I've been noticing is, we've been getting a lot of inquiries and stuff like that, but just people getting more digital. It just seems like it blows my mind how many companies are still so traditional in terms of just print media and billboards and all that type of stuff. And so if I don't know overall how marketing budgets are doing or anything like that, but it seems like there's an uptick in just wanting to do more digital. Couple of clients, their budget came down, but of the budget, a bit more came with digital. So overall, we're actually spending more on digital than before all this happened, but the traditional is down. And so it's, I've been in digital marketing for a while, and I've been, voicing the powers of it. You can track it, the analytics behind it and all that. And so I'm excited to kind of see the expedited adoption of digital transformation, I guess. And so,
Yeah, it's funny because we've been perhaps on the benefiting end, and so of our clients that are in the digital space, which is obviously like our main focus. And I guess what I'm wondering about is it actually a trend towards digital, or is it just PPP money kind of being thrown around?
Yeah.
So who knows? I think it's probably a bit of both.
Yep.
Being honest. So. Yeah, we'll see where it all goes. I guess like what, and this is something I've talked about, when I had Roy Sutherland on our podcast, and he's fantastic, but his whole thing is like the signaling value. Like there's signaling value in doing big, bold stuff that you can't measure. If you have a television commercial, you can't measure it, but what it's saying to everyone is, I can afford to put on a television commercial. I'm just wondering. I mean, obviously television is not going away, but I'm just wondering where that signaling value goes. And I think eventually it's going to be events, because in-person events, because in order to hold an in-person event, and I'm talking like a year down the road, it's going to be such a flex. You're going to have so much stuff in order to be able to say, we can safely bring you into this event.
Yep.
It's going to be like a show of strength. So I think in-person events are going to become like the Super Bowl commercials and the billboards of the world or something. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, even before this, I mean, I was huge on just events, even if you're not an event company. I mean, just creating some type of events that create in-person engagement. I mean, it's everyone's like, I need to either be doing digital or in person. And it's like, use digital to create in-person experiences, because those in-person experiences, now the people that are there are selling themselves to each other, at your event. And so, I mean, I've been huge on them before, but I mean, to your point, I didn't even think of that. I mean, it's just, if you can put it on and have the finances and logistics figured out and all that, it's just like, look at who we are. We're obviously, we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so it helps build that brand trust and, I guess, equity from a consumer perspective.
Yeah, and one of our clients that I think is pivoting pretty successfully or in the event space is doing lots of hybrid stuff. So they might have a digital event with a targeted group of people, and then they're sending them, goodies or swag before, or stuff that's going to apply to the event or whatever. So I do think there's this opportunity for hybrid models, and also one thing that I was talking about with this client was that, and he might have made this point, is that if an in-person event has issues, if there's like a hurdle at an in-person event or the caterer is late, you can kind of figure it out. You can kind of like hustle and go pick up bagels or something. But if the digital event gets screwy, like it's just people are just going to say, nah, I'm going to like turn this off and go for a walk. So the margin of error is a lot smaller. So I think that, as the innovation goes up with digital events, it's going to require more expertise and just people that can figure out how to do it the right way, beyond just Zoom.
Yep.
So, or whatever. Yeah.
No, I agree. And so, I mean, as we kind of look at the future into your crystal ball, I mean, what are some of the things that you guys are doing? What are you guys as a company, just what are some of the big goals that you have in the next 6 months, as we're kind of navigating this and what this new norm looks like? I mean, what do you guys kind of have on your radar?
Yeah. So, I mean, internally, our 6-month, goal is basically first to continue to like serve our clients well and navigate all this stuff, which means kind of keeping our finger on the pulse of what's working, what's not, and being able to pivot quickly. So that's priority number one. I think priority number two is giving more useful assets to other agencies that might not be able to take us on yet. Just not leaving like agencies that are starting out or smaller in the lurch. And I think that's going to be more about the done with you as opposed to the done for you models. So the course, more content, that sort of thing. And beyond that, just our podcast, I think that's just been so valuable in ways that are bigger than leads or money or anything. And talking to people such as yourselves, having interesting conversations, figuring out what's going on is quote unquote now more than ever kind of thing. So that's kind of what's on our radar.
Cool. Yeah, no, we're big on a lot of content production in the near future. I mean, we've been rolling out a couple different things, but yeah, I think content's always been king. I think figuring out how to reverse engineer content production to who you're trying to go after is where the new king, I guess, sits. And so that's what we're trying to do. Who are all the different people we want to reach, and trying to just produce content specifically for them. And so
yeah,
it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think so. It'll definitely won't be boring, if nothing else. Yeah.
So, I mean, as we kind of wrap up, I mean, you work with a lot of agencies. If there's there's anything that you can kind of say to them, any advice when it comes to just agencies and how they're navigating now, or how to acquire new customers, because this will apply to pretty much every type of business. I mean, what kind of are the big takeaways or pieces of advice that you'd give?
Yeah, there's so much. It's always like when I get questions like that, it's hard to be concise, and it's also hard to not just be overly preachy, because I think that a lot of agencies have a lot to teach as well. So I guess I would say, like, take a step back, take a breath, go outside, whatever, and think about where you have been useful historically and where you can be useful, and then get focused on that, and then get everything else off your plate,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's literally the biggest thing I'm working on now is how to delegate a bit more. But I mean, it just goes back to the roots. It's what problem are you trying to solve and how can you solve it, and just laser focus on that, and that's where success is going to come.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And beyond that, if people are interested in kind of learning more what we're doing, shameless plug sort of deal here. But we did just put out a webinar, and it's not very pitchy. And it goes through copy, it goes through how we've shifted up strategies and what we're thinking about across different channels. And I think that there's things that you can run with right away. So if anybody's interested in that, it's basically our site, salesschema.com. That's sales and then schemas and schematic.com/crisis prospecting, one word, not to be overly scary. That's
no, I love it. I'm definitely gonna check it out. I mean, how can people find you on social media?
So to be honest, and my detriment, I'm not super active on like Twitter or anything like that. Maybe I should be, but LinkedIn is good. I don't know, remember my own URL, but saleschema.com or dan@saleschema.com is the best place to reach me. And email's my friend. I'm good about email. I'm less good about the others. So
awesome.
Yep.
Well, yeah, we'll definitely include that link in the show notes, and allow anyone to kind of click and navigate over there. But I really appreciate your time. I mean, it was just awesome to kind of hear just how you're helping other agencies out, and just kind of get your perspective on how things are just going on the marketing side of things.
Yeah. Likewise, Dustin. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.